So the first one I wanted to talk about is kind of a double whammy twofer. One of them has been challenged more than the other, but they kind of come as a pair, and that's The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So these ones were almost universally, consistently banned from when they were published to today. So originally, some of the reasons they were banned were some people just said that they were trash literature and they shouldn't be on shelves and shouldn't be accessible to people. Some people had problems with kind of Mark Twain's abolitionist kind of message in the stories. But then, of course, we've kind of done a 180, and a lot of the reasons that these two get banned today are for racial slurs. So it was kind of one of those, at the time when it was published, it was seen as a little maybe too progressive. And now when we look at it, we're like, wow, these didn't age well. They're a product of their time in kind of a way like that. So that's kind of, these ones always tend to be on the list, especially The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So these have kind of, when we talk about Mark Twain, there's a lot that we connect to Disney. Specifically with these books, we've got some movies in the early 90s. It took Disney a while to make these into movies, almost 100 years after they were published, or more than, I should say. So we've got The Adventures of Huck Finn with Elijah Wood, and then we've got Tom and Huck with JTT, Jonathan Taylor Thomas, who I'll highlight there. And then, of course, in the parks, we've got the Tom Sawyer Island in Disneyland, Walt Disney World, and Tokyo Disneyland has a version too. So I just kind of want to know your experiences as I hit my microphone, right? Your experiences with Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer in the Disney sense.
Sure. I think for me, in the literary sense, I read both for school, and so that absolutely would enhance my experience from the Disney front. Tom Sawyer we read in 6th grade. Now, I had been visiting the Disney parks, specifically Walt Disney World in Florida, for many years before that. But I remember after reading Tom Sawyer that year, I was really excited to go to Tom Sawyer Island that summer because I had a frame of reference for those characters. Like, okay, it says like Tom, Hart, Becky painted on the fence. I'm like, oh, well, now I know what this whole fence painting is about and who these characters are. I did not realize there was the Elijah Wood movie. Definitely saw the JTT one.
Gotcha.
But now I'm going to have to put the Elijah Wood film on my list.
Nice.
Same with me on the movie front. Yeah. I've seen the JTT, obviously. But I don't think I remember the Elijah Wood one either. All I really know him for is Lord of the Rings and Happy Feet.
Right.
So I will also revisit this one, but kind of the same. And I went through a classics phase. I never read these in school. And I don't know if that's because they were maybe questioned or banned, or if that's because we just took another route with the number of books. Because most English classes go by themes. You're going to read books that fit themes. And you've got so many books that can fit those. But we've discussed on Book and the Mouse and with Courtney. In college, I kind of went through a classics phase where, like, I'm only going to read classics. I feel like I don't know these references that people make, or I feel like I should read those. I don't know why I went through this phase. I did. All reading is.
I don't know why you weren't. I don't know why you weren't an English major. Between the two of us, I'm the English major.
Okay, so in Maryland, I tried. I wanted to double in English, and they told me I was not allowed to double in English and history.
And education.
Yeah, and education. I would have been a triple major, and that would have just
won.
Yeah.
That explains so much.
I was torn. I was very torn. History won out. But I do remember reading them, and the racial slurs I remember sticking out to me. Now, my, again, social studies history teacher cap here.
Right.
The way I read it, though, like, well, yes, those slurs were there. Maybe I could see why you don't want this book. Maybe 6th grade, I would have been maybe a little cautious about with that kind of language. I would have been curious to see how your teacher framed that, or if you didn't read the whole book, but you read excerpts, like maybe you jumped around.
That was Tom Sawyer, and I don't think it says prevalent. Huckleberry Finn was 11th grade, and I feel like there is a distinction there between the two.
Sure.
Because I wouldn't be in favor of banning it or challenging it maybe at a high school level, because if we are talking about race, you can't exclude that language because it was very real and very impactful in the time that it was used, and it still is. And I wouldn't want to avoid that conversation because that language is being used purposefully, and how that affects, and it does affect the character. So I'm not saying it's right to use that language every day, but within the story and the structure that it's in, and if we're doing, you could also study Tom Sawyer. Well, it's fiction, I think, as removed as we are, you could even say it's historic fiction at this point, because you could look at setting and look at characters and see how history is playing out there in the Reconstruction era when it's published, what that language means. So I saw the language, again, I was reading this in college as a history major studying American history, that I was able to read it as this is part of the American story. It's a hard part of the story, but we should talk about it. But then when you watch the films, though, I don't think you would see half of that show up. Like they focus on the parts I think Walt Disney loved, which was all the adventure and the boys, like the story of the Midwest and adventure and big dreamers.
Yes, and that's, I wondered too, with Courtney, but I think you kind of answered it with, as far as when you read it, was it a like abridged, edited version? Because I know some schools will have a like kind of a classroom set, and you'll open it up and you'll see that words have been changed. So that adventure story is still there, but that language has been taken out, because it's kind of one of those when teachers want to teach the adventure but not necessarily have the controversy.
No, I think it had the words.
Gotcha.
In it, yeah. Well, I remember, this is actually probably the first time I listened to an audiobook was for The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in particular, because that one is written so prominently in a certain dialect, and the way that I read, I'm a speed reader, and so I was not processing the words very well in the way that I read quickly. So I literally read along with the audiobook in my ear, because I don't even know if it might have been like a free podcast where they read it because it was in the public domain kind of thing. And I was like, this is great. Like, just for reading comprehension on my end. So I do feel like it was not abridged from those regulations.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that's my first experience with it was from this, like, we would get these great illustrated classics, they were called. You'd get them at the grocery store, and they were heavily abridged kind of kids versions of the classics. So that my first experience with Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer were very, as far as reading them, were very sanitized and kind of boiled down just to those adventure stories. So then by the time I got to read the other ones later, it was kind of a revelation that, wow, this was missing quite a bit. And it was controversial, and it was definitely, like you said, Emily, kind of reading it like a primary source as kind of a piece from the time that it came from. So with regards to Disney, am I safe in saying, because I know you're big parks fans, both of you, is your number one Disney connection to these books Tom Sawyer Island?
Yeah, I would think so.
I love Tom Sawyer Island, and I could just hang out there all day. It's like different. It's like to be on the island. It's like the island life, right? Mm-hmm. You get to slow down, and it's just a different pace from the rest of the park.
I love the caves. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's a secondhand story, but I had friends. I'm an only child, and my mom's a teacher. And sometimes we would travel at the same time as another teacher from her school who had kids around my age. And we met up later for dinner. And the brother was telling me he and his sister, they got in an argument on Tom Sawyer Island and a storm was coming, and she left, but he couldn't leave because then the little rafts, like, Florida storm springs up. He could not leave. So he was trapped on Tom Sawyer Island for like an hour. So he went and hid in the caves and like started scaring people. Oh.
That's kind of a very Tom Sawyer story, though, isn't it?
It is. I was like, he embodied the spirit of Tom or Huckleberry Finn. I'm just shook by this 1993 Elijah Wood. I'm looking it up, and it was theatrical too. I was thinking, it was like one of those like ABC movie. Yeah, no, this. How did I miss this?
I will say personally, I prefer the Elijah Wood one to the Jonathan Taylor Thomas Tom and Huck.
JTT plays fast and loose with these attacks.
He does like a Batman whisper voice. I rewatched it not too long ago, and he like whispers so many of his lines, and I was like, I don't know that's what my Tom Sawyer felt like when I think of the story.
No.
But he was trying to be in all the Tiger Beat magazines and stuff at the time, so that was the goal, right?
And there's also Becky. You get the love interest.
Yes.
And it's so precious too, because like I do think of Tom and Becky when I think of like what does like preteen love look like sometimes. Like they're so like it's so funny. And as a teacher in a high school, like I know it's high school, but like watching freshmen try to flirt with each other is hysterical. I predominantly teach freshmen. So they're still in that like I'm emerging from middle school.
Right.
And it's so funny. And that's what it reminds me of, like how he's like trying to be all suave and she's like, no, like that's just not it. And like it takes multiple tries and like building that friendship first. So I always liked that part. I mean, that's what we watched JTT for. Like that's why we were all watching it, was because they're like, I'm nothing Becky. But that's what I think of, like thinking back of those funny scenes of him like trying to connect with her, and she's just like, oh, like lets him drop through the ceiling and just walks away when he's in trouble. With this being in like the late 1800s when these books were coming out, they definitely were like that, like pre-YA as a genre type thing, where like that wasn't necessarily as like it wasn't the booming genre that it is now that sells millions of books each year. It was it wasn't even a thing yet. So these stories, maybe were kind of a guiding force for some later books, maybe even some that we'll talk about later, that have some adventure and relationships in them and things like that. Do you think it was like, are you surprised that Disney adapted these into films? Like based on the source material, like what about it seems like Disney?
So I think it goes into that adventure from like what Walt would expect. Like how Walt, like it kind of shocked me that Walt Disney himself was not the one to make these movies.
That's how I was thinking too. Yeah. I feel like Walt has often, I don't know the exact quote, but said like, the boyhood dreams of like floating down the Mississippi, and certainly I guess the Walt thing that he touched is putting it predominantly in Disneyland, and then we had it added to Walt Disney World and Tokyo Disneyland as well, I believe. But yeah, that he didn't adapt it, even just for something like the Disneyland TV series. Like, did David Crockett,
Alice in Wonderland like 4 times.
Yeah.
I'm surprised, Spin and Marty, one of those little Zorro, like give it a few, that now in retrospect, that feels shocking to me too. But I agree with you, Eric.
You figure too, it would have been a bigger deal too. Like if he would have done it, he would have put it would have been one of those things that stuck with us.
Right. He did have a child portraying Tom Sawyer. We read his book, Tom Nabby, like from Tom Sawyer to Disney Legend. But I think it's basically because Tom Nabby just kept asking, can I be Tom Sawyer? And then it went on to have a 40+ career year with Disney, because he started at age 12 and went on till his early 60s.
Right. No, I just read Dick Nunes's autobiography.
Oh, nice.
Came out in the fall, and he talks about hiring Tom Nabby from his side, and he's like, this kid just ran up to me and was like, Walt says you need to give me a job, and it was just like a whirlwind kind of thing for like how he was in it. So like, no, that, and I know you guys had done that book, and no, definitely there was a live Tom Sawyer in the parks, yet we never got that movie until the 90s. Well, both of those.
I wonder if this is one that'll be a reboot someday, like down the path we're going right now with movies.
Right.
Everything.
Tom and Huck. It's been 30 years. It could be the next
Yeah, and then they'll have to get Jonathan Taylor Thomas to play like kind of a bit role somewhere.
Oh yeah, like they did Wednesday, and Christina Ricci's has a cameo in it.
Right.
Yeah.
If you like this video, like and subscribe. If you really like this video, visit synergylovescompany.com for the full audio podcast.